Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are just past the 2032 draft. Appreciate all the input over the past several days that I think helped get us to a pretty good spot in how that draft turned out. Even if we are to have several impact players develop for our organization over the next 5, 10, 15 years from that draft, however, that may not be the most momentous thing that happened for our Oakland A's today here on July 11th, 2032. And that's because this A's squad that's made the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years, made the ALCS 2 of the last 3 years, and won an improbable World Series in 2029 is going for it once again. And we have made a big deal today to bring on one of the most proficient hitters in baseball today. Quite honestly, when all is said and done, maybe one of the top few dozen most proficient hitters in all of Major League Baseball history. And that's that we brought Juan Soto on board to hopefully give this offense of ours a boost. Gave a few players to the Twins organization to bring him on board. Most notably, Arturo Estrada, the number 97 prospect in baseball, guy who was our prime international amateur free agent signing several years ago. So giving up Estrada as well as 3 other players for a 2.5 month rental is certainly a bold move for these A's. But as I noted, we have brought on a player who has a 154 career WRC plus, perennial leader in terms of walks, on base percentage, and 3 times in his career WRC plus. So excellent career for Soto with a WAR of over 70 at this point. And we are hoping that over the next 2.5+ months of the regular season, and then hopefully long into the playoffs, he will help jumpstart this offense. Although we're 45-45 this year, just at 500 and clinging to the final wild card spot in the American League, we have underperformed expectations by 4 games. And as Soto comes on board, we rank 8th in the American League in runs scored. But you can see we are in the bottom third of the league in several important categories, including home runs, where we're tied for 11th. We're actually 4th in the league in walks. That's our most proficient offensive trait, and you would certainly think that having Soto on board will help with that. So we've got still 3 weeks left to the trade deadline. My thought is that the acquisition of Soto and then the acquisition about a week and a half ago of Ty Madden, one of the top pitchers on the market, will likely be our biggest moves. But we are going to continue thinking about how we can try to improve this team over these next 3 weeks. In terms of the lineup change that we made to get Soto onto the roster, going to be less playing time going forward for one player in particular, at least at the major league level. And that is because the move that we did make was to send the young infielder who we signed to a long extension this past off season down to AAA. Kevin Stubblefield was only hitting .234 for us at the major league level with an 81 WRC plus. He's actually been a below replacement level player for us. We still think he's got a little bit of growth that could happen in his game, potentially more five more points to improve to reach his ceiling in BABIP, power, and eye. And given that he only had 15 games of AAA experience before we brought him up for the playoffs last year and then into the majors this year, I think since he hasn't been particularly productive and some of the other guys who we were going to potentially have to send down to make room for Soto, we're going to have to make it through waivers for us to maintain their rights. I think the right decision is to give Stubblefield some everyday playing time for the next 7 or 8 weeks in AAA before presumably we'll have him back when we get to September call-ups. And one of the things that I often talk about in this game is even when I have the smallest budget and payroll in baseball, as we've had for the vast majority of this playthrough with the Oakland A's, I like to try to invest as much as possible in player development, and I also like to invest a pretty good amount. You can see that we're 60% above baseline here in the scouting budget, and I like to typically have a pretty good chunk of the scouting budget on international scouting, as well as a scout who is pretty strong with those international prospects. And the big part of the reason is it's one of the areas where if you have a really good international scout and you invest a lot of money in scouting and a good chunk of it into international scouting in general, you're going to more often get scouting discoveries like this one, which just happened in Venezuela. 16-year-old starting pitcher Humberto Lara. See him as having 4-star potential. Think this is a starting pitcher with potentially really good stamina, excellent at holding on runners, whose stuff could be off the charts, with decent movement and acceptable control if everything develops. Has the potential to have a 3 to 6 pitch arsenal if everything goes well. This is the kind of player who typically would go fairly high in a draft if he was a American prospect, or would go for a good chunk of a team's budget if he was an international amateur free agent. And by making those investments that I talked about in scouting and international scouting and having a good scout, you're going to find more guys like this over time. Whether Lara actually becomes anything is certainly up in the air, as he's barely 16 years old, but he is a guy that I am glad is going to be part of our organization going forward. And although we're excited to have Mr. Lara as part of our organization, the first week of Juan Soto didn't go as well as we would have hoped in the dream scenario. 3-4 record since the trade back on last Sunday. So that means we head into the All-Star break a game below 500. Taking a look at the standings here in the American League, we are still hanging on to that AL wild card, but the Twins and the Rangers, interestingly, the two teams that we traded with for Soto and Madden, are a game and 2 games behind us respectively, and the Mariners in our division also lurking 2 games behind us. Taking a look at the leaderboard here, more than midway through the season, Colt Keith, in what is likely his final year with us, has started to produce more recently. 3rd in the American League with 70 ribbies. He's got his batting average up over 250 and his WRC plus up over 120. And he remains, or actually is more accurately, the only player near the top of one of the key leaderboards for us on this Oakland A's team as we head into the All-Star break here in 2032. And although, as I've noted, we've made the playoffs 2 of the last 3 years, and if the season were to end today, it would be 3 out of 4 seasons in the postseason for these Oakland A's. Not a lot of respect for Oakland in the All-Star game selection this year. Jackson Ferris, another guy who could possibly be in his final year with us this year, is our lone All-Star. 8-9 record, but he does have a really good 3.45 ERA. And he's striking out 11 batters per 9 innings. He's put up a 3.4 WAR for us. So the ace of our rotation, pitching pretty well this year. And he is still likely to be arbitration eligible next year because of some injuries that he's had, but set to be making over $18 million, which is going to mean it may be a challenge for us to bring him back. But other than Ferris, no All-Stars for us this year, despite the nice start to his major league career by Jake Ortega. He's not on the team, despite Colt Keith being third in the AL in ribbies. He's not on the team. And even our new addition, Juan Soto, is not on the team either. Take a quick look just at how the new additions have been performing for us. Ty Madden has now started 3 games, a 2-1 record, which is good, but a 6.06 ERA. So after a really nice outing his first time out, mixed results since then. Seems like he's probably gotten a little bit unlucky, though. 21 strikeouts over those 16 and a third innings. His whip of 1.29 is not bad, and he hasn't allowed a home run, but he certainly has apparently given up some hits at key times to enable those runs to score, despite some secondary statistics that don't look too bad. We'll check in on Jared Kelnick, who's had a little more time to play with us. The batting average is up to 179 in his first 28 at-bats. Certainly not taking the world by storm, but he is hitting a little bit better over this past week. And then we'll check in, most importantly, on what Juan Soto has done with us. And he's off to a glittering start with the Oakland A's, hitting .379, 2 doubles, 2 homers, and 11 ribbies in just 29 at-bats. Also walked 5 times, so he's put up a 195 WRC plus for us in his first 7 games in an Oakland A's uniform. And as we noted, not an all-star this year, though, for the perennial all-star here in 2032, which I'm guessing is actually he's had some, I was guessing it was going to be a pretty long streak of him being an all-star, but it looked like although he made the all-star team in 2030 and 2031, he missed it in both 2028 and 2029. So Soto, for whatever reason, not a actual perennial all-star at this point. And speaking of guys who potentially you would have thought could have been in the mix to become all-stars on our team, I did forget to mention Bobby Cabral, the youngster who we traded for last offseason to hopefully become a cornerstone of our offense. And although the batting average has dipped to .247, he still does have 25 homers, 64 ribbies, and a 127 WRC plus here in mid-July. Ortega, the youngster, first year in the majors, or first full year in the majors, more accurately, still hitting over 300, 26 doubles, 9 homers, scored 55 runs, driven in 33, has been successful in 9 out of 10 stolen base attempts, and has a 128 WRC plus. So although Ferris is the only all-star, with the addition of Mr. Soto, along with Ortega, Keith, and Cabral, the hope is that if we get some better offensive performances from some of the other players over the second half of the season, this team will be able to score a lot more runs than we have thus far. You can see we have improved to 7th in the American League in runs scored just in the week that Soto has been on our team. And we did take 2 out of 3 coming out of the All-Star break to get the record back to an even 500, 100 games into the season. So 62 games left to try to guide this team into the playoffs. We've got 2 against the Padres at home and then 2 against Seattle on the road before we get to the trade deadline. Probably going to spend a little bit of time offline right now and just see if there's anything interesting for us to consider doing in the trade market. Not a ton of likely changes in our team statistics. At 50 and 50, we're only 3 worse than Pythagorean expectations now. Despite not playing as well over the last couple of weeks, we still have a 12-7 record in July, back to 8th in the AL in runs scored, still 4th in walks, 13th in home runs. So not a ton of progress, but it's a very small sample size, and Soto is only one guy to help move us in the right direction. We rank fifth in the American League in runs allowed at this point. The pitching staff, middle to slightly upper end of the pack in most of the statistics with pitching. Hopefully those will get a little bit better over the next couple of months, and hopefully the offense will be better as well as we try to steer this team into the playoffs. We are tied for the second and third spot in the wild card race now with the Rays, and both us and the Rays are two clear of the Rangers and the Twins in this many-team battle for these last couple wild card spots in the American League this year. And as we peruse the trade market in these final days before we get to the trade deadline, doesn't seem to me as if there's going to be anything real impactful for us to do as far as adding an everyday player. Michael Harris II still unwilling to waive his no-trade clause. The price for Cole Young is extremely high. Harry Ford, Daryl Hernandez both have pretty high prices. So does Matt McLean. Hidero Endo hurt, not too far from getting back, but don't think he's going to be that much of a difference maker for us offensively. Couple other guys whose bats could potentially help us, Brian Ramos and Marco Luciano. The prices for them are both just more than I think we should be willing to spend. Keep in mind that we still do have some injury issues with this team, and Luis Lara is only a week or two away from coming back, which hopefully will help our offense if he performs better than he has over the first part of this year and goes back to the form he had last season for us. And it's also conceivable that the youngster Levi Sterling will be back around the beginning of September to hopefully help bolster our pitching staff. So I don't think we have to be desperate. We've clearly made two pretty significant moves, bringing on board Mr. Soto and Mr. Madden. That said, there still might be some options to help the pitching staff that we're going to continue to investigate. And taking a look at the pitching market, the high end of the market is pretty thin at this point, at least as far as the players who are on the trade block. Garrett Crochet and Bobby Miller, two guys who can touch triple digits, both fairly expensive, and the top pitcher available, Carlos Rodriguez, is also pretty expensive. Taking a look at what we can trade for with him, kind of interesting that the only guys who will land us Rodriguez are Ty Madden and Juan Soto, the two players that we've recently traded for as rentals for this push for the playoffs. So doesn't make sense to me to deal either of them for Mr. Rodriguez. Do think there could be some opportunities with a somewhat lower regarded starting pitcher. The price for Aaron Ashby is still pretty high, but there are a few other options out there. Shane Baz, one of the ones that we were looking at, is unfortunately no longer on the trade block. Looks like the Rangers dealt him almost 2 weeks ago at this point to the Pirates organization, and Baz is 1-1 with a 4.15 ERA in his first two starts in Pittsburgh. Baz was good with us a year ago. We talked about potentially bringing him back a couple of episodes ago. Concern with Baz is a little bit that vesting option for $13.4 million. If we're going to be trading to bring a guy on board, we're going to want to use him as much as possible, and I'd hate to have to be in a position where I might be tempted to not pitch him in a critical game to make the playoffs down the stretch because I didn't want a contract to vest. So perhaps best that I don't get my head wrapped into a real weird situation and do something stupid by bringing Boz on board. But there are a couple interesting options that I think could help in theory, the back end of our rotation, although honestly, I think any starters that we bring on at this point would likely end up in the bullpen for us, and just as insurance, given that Caden Dana was such a disaster as a starter for us this year, and other guys who might potentially start like Henry Lillane and Mason Black have been solid but unspectacular this year. Bringing a decent starter on board to join some of those guys in the bullpen and put us in a situation where we might have an interesting decision to make about sending someone down to AAA is the most probable path that I think we might look to go down here if we're going to make a final trade for this team in these last few days before the 2032 trade deadline. And we've got a trade together for a starter who kind of meets the profile that I outlined, Daniel Espino of the Reds organization. The Reds are a bad team, last place in the NL Central at this point, so they're actually willing to keep a pretty big chunk of his $8.8 million contract. Not that we really need him to, but if they're willing to, we're going to take advantage of it. Like the fact that he's got pretty good stuff, a nice 4-pitch arsenal with 3 well above average pitches, throws in the mid to high 90s. Over the course of his career at the major league level, he's been a bit below average in terms of his ERA plus and his FIP minus. Competent in terms of his stamina, competent in terms of holding runners. He is wrecked physically, so he's not someone we're going to really be able to rely that heavily on, but does give us an insurance policy who could be a more than acceptable 5th starter, and all it's going to take is Josh Winkowski to pick him up, a guy who we've had in AA this year, respectable major league pitcher. He's got about the same amount of major league experience, and if you look at his ERA plus and his FIP minus, he's actually been a bit better than Espino over the course of his career, but we are still going to go for the better stuff on paper of Espino and take advantage of the opportunity to bring him on board to give us a little bit more depth in the organization. Espino actually also does have 3 option years left. I don't think he will accept a assignment to AAA, but it is an option we can at least look at. First, we'll obviously need to place him on the secondary roster. And not surprisingly, he refuses to be demoted, so that will require us to make a roster move to get Espino onto the major league roster, but still expect, particularly working out of the pen, that hopefully he'll be better than some of the guys that we've had in the bullpen this year. And he will give us, as we said, as long as he's healthy, an option if we have some injuries towards the back end of our rotation. And we ended up sending down the left-hander, Mr. Lillane, who had done a solid job for us this year. He still had options, but had been working as a middle reliever for us to make room for Espino. No certainty as to which of these pitchers will ultimately be on the playoff roster if we end up being fortunate enough to make the playoffs. Would think that Henry Lillane will be back certainly in September. If not, if we have some injuries, possibly even before then. But wanted to get Espino onto the major league roster, and we'll see if hopefully he can give our bullpen a bit of a boost. Although with Lillane gone, we now only have 2 lefties out of the bullpen, and of course the lefty Ferris in the rotation. And we've won 2 in a row, actually 4 in a row overall, but 2 in a row since the last time we checked in to push our record to 52-50 on the season. We are now in the second wild card spot, game and a half up on the Rays and the Twins for the final wild card spot in the American League. And we have one final big trade brewing. Honestly, not nearly as big as the Madden or Soto trades, but a guy that we talked about not all that long ago. We look like we might be able to bring him on board. It's another deal where we're going to have to give up one of the better prospects in our organization, and a guy that we invested a first round pick in not that long ago. But he is a guy who I question his long-term future with us. And we'll be picking up a guy who I think can help us win more this year. And we'll also be picking up some cash, which will be important to potentially sign the guy that we picked in the 19th round that's impossible to sign. It will give us an option to do that. So rather than just continuing to talk about it, I guess I can show you this trade that I've been working on. And it's kind of a wild one. As I mentioned, we'll get a big chunk of cash back. We'll also get Brian Ramos, who I talked about earlier. He's in the last year of his deal with the Phillies, and certainly has a proven major league bat with a 120 WRC plus over the course of his career. He's on the wrong side of 30. He's not particularly dynamic defensively, but would give us another solid and proven veteran major league bat for our lineup. We'd also get infielder Devin Saltaban. Don't see him being a huge improvement as a utility infielder for us this year, but Arakawa still does have options, so we could open up a roster spot by sending him down. And next year, when we conceivably might be looking for multiple infielders, Saltaban is a guy who is a very good defensive second baseman, can also certainly play short, can play corner outfield spots, has some speed. Issue with him is the bat, an 83 WRC plus over the course of his career, and he's also due to be making around $3 million plus in arbitration next year. So certainly not a perfect option for us, but someone who I think can help us this year and at least be in the mix of options for us next year. And then we also get a young reliever, Jesus Vargas, 17-year-old. He's just a lottery ticket, an international free agent signing from earlier this year, who's been playing with the DSL team for the Phillies. I think his stuff could be outstanding. Not so sure about his ability to keep the ball in the ballpark, though. We have to give up John Rhodes, the center fielder, who's done a really nice job for us, hitting .361 with a 184 WRC plus since we brought him up to play against lefties. Bringing on board Mr. Ramos kind of takes the spot in the lineup away from Mr. Rhodes, unfortunately. And with Lara hopefully coming back in a couple of weeks, between Ortega and Lara, we still should have center field covered for the medium term. We also need to open up room on the 40-man roster if we bring over both Ramos and Saltaban. And Rhodes had some value. We're still going to have to waive and DFA another player since we are at 40 out of 40 on the 40-man roster. But moving on from Rhodes will open up at least one of the two spots we need in this trade. George Valera, who is a more than competent outfielder. He's put up a 121 WRC plus for us in AAA. Great personality, a useful major leaguer with over 5 years of experience, but he's just organizational depth for us. The one that's going to hurt is giving up Joe Lewin. You may remember we use a supplemental first-round pick on this left-handed pitcher in the 2030 draft and had big hopes for him. He just got hurt with a torn rotator cuff a few days ago. He was 2-2 with a 2.33 ERA in rookie ball for us. He's listed as the number 150 prospect in baseball. So I don't love moving on from him shortly after moving on from Estrada. But if I'm being realistic about Lewin, we think his stuff in a best case scenario is major league average. And when we look at his pitching arsenal right now, might have an above average cutter when all is said and done, but his fastball and his sinker are maybe slightly above average in a perfect situation, and it doesn't seem like that curve is going to turn into much. Do think his movement and his control could be above average, but he's going to be out for most of next year with that torn rotator cuff. He's going to be 20 years old by the time he comes back from that injury, never having played above rookie ball. The fact that we're getting a prospecty guy in return in Vargas, in addition to the rental of Ramos, Saltiban, and a lot of cash, makes me willing to give up Lewin for this rental. I didn't expect we'd be making another trade, particularly another trade where we'd be giving up a guy who, as I noted, is still viewed as one of the top prospects in our organization. And with all the guys who have made the major leagues recently, we're down to 18th out of 30th in terms of our minor league system ranking. And as you can see, as I noted, Lewin, the 150th ranked prospect in baseball, a significant guy for us to be giving up, but we are in win now mode. And I think Ramos helps us win now with another proven major league bat. So we're going for it. We're going to go ahead and complete this trade. The fans happy that Ramos is on board, similar to the acquisition of Soto. We'll probably take a hit to fan interest when he ends up most likely leaving after this season. But we did get a 1-point bump there up to 56. And we're now in a situation where we've added 2 everyday players, a really good starter, and a reliever who could start for us in a pinch to bolster this roster as we close in on the trade deadline here in 2032. And we ended up sending Arakawa back down to AAA as expected to make room on the roster for Saltiban. Chase DeLauder also is no longer a starter for us, even against right-handed pitching. He had been hitting a bit better of late to get his season WRC plus to 90. Hopefully he'll be a pretty useful left-handed hitting bat off of the bench. But we put Ramos in as our first baseman and the number 5 hitter against righties. And Ramos is going to be our DH against lefties. Split up Soto and Keith, the 2 lefties in the middle of the order there. Ramos just a more accomplished hitter than DeLauder, even though DeLauder is the lefty. You think you might want to play against right-handed pitching, but he hasn't done enough this year to earn that spot for us. So feel like we've made the team better. My frugalness is showing here. I mentioned that we have plenty of money now with all the money we got back in that trade to potentially bring on Jonathan Jackson, the 19th round draft pick, who's impossible allegedly to sign. He says he was looking for in excess of $11 million to sign. I just can't justify that given what he is, even though in theory we have the money. So I'm just going to try to learn something. I offered him $5 million. I think there's almost no way that he'll accept this, but wanted to at least throw an offer out there. And like I said, I don't think we'll actually sign Jackson, but you never know if you don't try. So we're going to put a wacky offer out to him, but I just could not force myself to make a $12-13 million kind of offer for a guy who, in a best case scenario, looks like a useful major league reliever. but I don't think he's going to end up exceptional by any stretch. And unfortunately, we lost the last 2 games of the month of July, both one-run losses to our division rivals on the road in Seattle. So despite all the investments that we've made in hopefully improving this roster, as we sit here on August 1st, we're back at 500 at 52-52, and we are actually out of the playoffs by a half a game behind the Rays and the Twins, who are tied for the second and third spots in the American League wild card race at this point. So my hope is that we have done enough over these last few weeks as we've approached the trade deadline to ensure that this team can ultimately make the playoffs. But as I noted, if the playoffs started today, we would unfortunately be on the outside looking in. Looking at our team statistics, we're 3 below Pythagorean expectations, have bounced back nicely with a 14-9 month in July, the first month of the year that we had a winning percentage over 600, and our first winning month since April, so we'll take that as a positive sign. Have slipped back to 10th in runs scored, up to 4th in runs allowed. Hopefully the moves that we have made will enable us over the final 58 games of the year to be well over 500 and hopefully position this team to make the playoffs when all is said and done here in 2032. And as the final 2 months of the season begin, as I noted, we are just out of the playoffs. The hope is that with the additions of Soto and Ramos to our lineup, Madden to our rotation, and Espino to our bullpen, that we are a better team now than we have been over the course of most of this season. We're also just a few days away from Luis Lara to be rejoining us. As we talked about earlier, he was an above-average offensive player last year with a 4.3 WAR thanks to his excellent defense. Been a rough year at the plate for him this year, but hopefully he will be more dynamic offensively when we do bring him back, and we'll potentially be getting Levi Sterling early September to hopefully make his major league debut for this 2032 season with us after he did a nice job as a September call-up last year. We've got several other guys lurking in the minors to hopefully help us in September as well, most notably Mr. Stubblefield, who we had to send down when we brought Soto on board, or more accurately, who we decided to send down when we brought Mr. Soto on board. So we will find out in the next episode whether everything we've invested into this Win Now team will result in a playoff berth for us. The issue is that we are 14 behind in the division with 2 teams in front of us. So while I feel like we likely will end up in the playoffs, it's not really realistic for us with only 58 games left to think that we're going to compete for the division. So even in a best case scenario where we make it to the playoffs, we're going to, in all probability, find ourselves in a best of 3 wild card series. But it is still a playoff berth if that happens, and we've got to be in it to win it. And we'll find out in the next episode whether we do make it to the postseason tournament for the 3rd time in 4 years here in 2032. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.